So this is our second in a series of an untold number of going through some of the top varieties of roses. I am here with our episode for Antique Rose Show with Master Rose Maven. I'm coming up with a different name each time.
Okay.
Pamela Greenwald. So Pamela, what rose are you showing us this episode?
Well, I particularly want to talk about this rose here called the Peggy Martin rose. It's also known as the Katrina rose because it's the most famous rose in America. I get hundreds and hundreds of orders for this rose. And the reason is that it survived being under salt water when Katrina storm came. It was underwater for about 3 or 4 months. It is very old rose. It was given to Peggy Martin, my friend, who lives did live in New Orleans. Now she's in another town, Gonzales. It came to her from a 90-year-old lady. So there was never a true name. Nobody could ever figure out who this rose really was. So it was named after Peggy Martin herself, who had a 10-year-old rose garden. All the roses were wiped out in Katrina, except for one, this rose, which is nothing more or less than a survivor.
That's interesting. So tell us a little bit about, does this require any special growing technique or care?
This rose is so easy to grow, and she will become, we call this type of rose a house eater, because you can see on this pergola, she'll get up on top of this pergola in 1 year. This is why everybody likes her also, because ramblers generally only bloom once a year. This rose will bloom more like 5 or 6 times a year.
Wow.
Also, you can see this little pom-pom it makes. So it starts out with little pieces like over here, little in singles, and then it ends up with a big group like a pom-pom. It's almost thornless. It's just no trouble, easy to grow, covers a trellis, and the money, there's a piece of the money from the sales of this rose that went to help rebuild New Orleans, and now the money goes to the Heritage Rose Foundation.
So the logical question is, do these roses still exist in New Orleans, or are they gone?
Oh no, this rose is now grown all over the world, because there was plenty of it after the storm. There was plenty of it. Peggy, because it came back from the storm, it was able to be propagated and grown all over the place.
All right, well, let's move on to our next one. Okay, so our education on various varieties of roses continues. So Pam, what do we have here?
Well, here we have one of the most popular of all the old tea roses. This is Mrs. B.R.Cant. It was named by its breeder after his wife. Benjamin Cant named it for his wife, Mrs. B.R.Cant, Mrs. Benjamin Cant. That makes a big, here's our dog on the table, Bella.
Hi, dog.
Bella Rosa. It makes a very big, as you see, large bloom, very fragrant, great for cutting. And some of the tea roses are able to get this large. Now, if you can show the whole bush, this bush is about 35 years old. Wow. And these teas can get to be, anywhere from 6 to 10 feet, some of these bigger ones, all the way around. And in the old days in California, they used to grow these as trees. They'd actually have a rose tree this big. And this rose will bloom all year, non-stop, just in and out of bloom all year long.
Can you explain to us what a tea rose is?
Well, a tea rose is one of the old classes of rose. They were being grown in Europe, and when the China's roses that repeated were found and brought to Europe, they crossed those China roses with the existing tea roses. The teas were called that because of the tea leaves. They were coming over on tea ships, to America and elsewhere. And so they smelled like tea, because of that. But the teas were greatly expanded from the China genetics, because the teas were then able to be roses that would only bloom once to roses that would bloom all year, but just from crossing them to these China roses. And the hybrid tea of today, the lollipop long-stemmed florist rose, is actually a child of the tea rose. The tea rose was crossed with the hybrid perpetual to make the hybrid tea. So when people say they grow tea roses, they usually don't mean these roses, but this is the correct tea rose.
Great. Well, that wraps up this episode. Oh, you had something else.
From the 1800s.
Ah, 1800s.
Passed down, clones, cuttings passed down to this rose right here.
Of course. So that wraps up this episode of Antique Rose Show. I'm here with Pamela Greenwald. We look forward to you tuning in to our next episode.